Okay.
Welcome to Blue Smoke and Black Ink, the podcast of 30-minute sit downs with some of the greatest writers in America. And today we're very pleased to have Steve Kiernan as our guest. When I think of Steve, I think of kind of a mirror image of his career and that of Norman Mailer's. You might remember Norman Mailer started as a novelist, wrote one of the great novels of World War II, The Naked and the Dead, and then later on switched over to journalism, to nonfiction, and started winning all sorts of awards, all sorts of things for books like Armies of the Night and things like that. Steve has been equally honored, but has gone opposite. He first received over 40 journalistic awards, including the George Polk Award, the Freedom of Information Award, the Scripps Howard National Award, and now, kind of midstream, he switched to being a top-notch best-selling novelist. How you doing, Steve? Great to see you.
Great to be with you. And, it's good to do that introduction because I know how multilingual you are. And I didn't know if we're going to be doing this in French or Swahili. So it's good to know it's going to be in English.
Yeah, I've got all my relatives in Italy fooled because I keep going to Google Translate and answering them in Italian, but that's about the best I can do. Steve, so many things to talk about. We're not going to be able to get it all in 30 minutes, but I'll do the best I can. The first is tell us about this mid-season switch from nonfiction to fiction. What brought that about?
Well, it wasn't as much of a switch as it might have looked like. I mean, there were two things going on. One is that I've always been writing. I've always been a storyteller. I was writing short stories. I wrote four or five books that didn't get published before my first one did. Like I was getting up in the morning and working before my job. So I wanted to be writing book length for a long time. I had about not quite 20 years in newspapers and sometimes an idea takes more than 1,000 words or 750 words to really get into. And so I was wanting to work in a longer form. And at the same time, the kind of what you call like the small metro newspapers that I worked at were all shrinking. That business was going away. Definitely felt like polar bear on an ice floe. It's just shrinking around me. And so those two things worked together. And then I was doing a lot of writing about healthcare for the Burlington Free Press back in its scrappier days. And and it turned out there was a lot that was going on. Yeah, it led to Last Rites. It was directly from what I was writing about in the newspaper into a book form with the encouragement of fellow writers who said you could get there's a book in this. And that's sort of how I broke in. And I did two nonfiction books with St. Martin's. And then I wanted to just write fiction. And I was very lucky because my first one got some attention, which always helps. And lo and behold, I left the newspaper 21 years ago, and I'm still I still have a house to live in, and I feel like I got away with something.
You're still paying the bills then, huh?
I am, yeah, most of the time.
Oh, that's great. Yes, Steve and I go back to our days of both writing for the Free Press. And I always like to say he was doing headlines and getting awards. I was doing gags and getting complaints, but we both somehow survived. You went into the novel business. We can't talk about all your novels, but I want to talk about at least two of my favorites. And your last one, I believe, is The Glass Chateau. Tell us a little bit about this one, Steve.
I can't tell you a little bit about it because there's a lot of me in that book, in that it took enormous, enormous research that was a blast. That book was so fun. It's a complicated book, right? It starts a
Yes.
month after the end of World War II. It's a bunch of damaged people that come together at a place that's been making stained glass windows for 400 years, and they're going to make windows to replace the ones that were bombed out in all the cathedrals of France and then later Germany. And so I learned about glass, I learned about stained glass, I learned about the politics of France after the war, which was identical to the United States now in terms of political divide, economic divide, religious divide, cultural divide. And somehow these people are supposed to rebuild a country together. And so I thought it was pretty good example from history of how that happened. how these nations that were destroyed and really divided, how they rebuilt how they rebuilt. And so the research for that was fantastic. I mean, I was compelled to go to France twice for research because, I am willing to suffer for my art and and go over there. But people were very generous, and there's a great artist colony that I got a residency at, so I had a place to stay. And oh, I loved that book. It's I still find things in it that my subconscious was doing I didn't even know while I was writing it.
I think one of the themes for me is the saving power of art, that no matter what happens in life, a commitment to art can save lives and save spirits. I don't know if you had that in mind when you wrote it, but that's what got across to me.
Well, I absolutely felt like the rebuilding story was not going to be here's how a nation rebuilds. It would be how an individual character in a novel rebuilds. And for them to have a skill that they needed to learn, a group of people who had different strengths and weaknesses, so they had to collaborate. And then they were making something that was extraordinary and that was beautiful. And there's a moment, a lot of this is about building toward this new window that's going to go into this cathedral. It's a big deal. There's a deadline. There's a lot at stake. And when they finally get the windows in and they unveil it, the guy who designed the window and did the art of it didn't look at the windows because he'd been seeing them day and night for months. Instead, he turned around and looked at the light on the faces of the people that had helped to build it. There, that the handful of people, all of them damaged by war, but somehow making art together had made them beautiful. And that's a thing I believe. And it kind of comes from the actual history of stained glass windows as being one of the places where Germany and France began to work together after the war, and where French people began to work together after the war.
Oh, that's terrific. Yeah, and that was certainly a great scene. What was your one kernel of realization that you got the idea for writing this book about Chagall and the windows? You remember the instant you said, "Oh, that could be a book."
I wish it were an instant, but it was more like I was thinking about wanting to write. I was thinking about this book's going to come out in 2023. Like, what kind of story are we going to want then? We're free of COVID, I assumed, and a lot of maybe some of the political strife would be a little bit lessened. I was wrong about that, clearly. But I wanted to tell a healing story, and I was looking for ones in the United States, and they were all not clean stories. There was all like there was this repaired, but this. And if you look at Reconstruction in the South, for example, I'd say that job is still unfinished. And
Yeah.
so, uh, and certainly in terms of building a unified nation, there's a lot of work to be done. And so I remembered I'd written a previous book in France, and I remember how much I loved the churches and the cathedrals. And I have a spiritual life, but I'm not a big go to cathedrals kind of guy. If
Hmm.
I'm in a city in the United States, I don't go, and I'm going to be a sightseer. I don't typically go to the cathedral. But I
Yeah.
was doing that in France because there were these amazing structures. And so I thought, okay, well, they were all destroyed, and the photos are unbelievable of how they were bombed and damaged. And I thought maybe this is the recovery story. And then I found out about artist Marc Chagall. And I'm not like an art historian. I don't have, it's purely a layman's interest. But he did a lot of windows. Before he was a very famous painter, he did a lot of windows,
Oh.
and he was a Jewish man from Belarus who was doing Christian windows in Catholic cathedrals, um, as part of a healing effort and a healing gesture with his art. And so then I just stole all of his ideas. No, then I took his designs and used them for the windows that the people were making in this book.
Oh, that's great. And I like how you keep touching on the politics and the history of these countries and of our country. If we had more time at the end of this podcast, I would love to talk to you about authentic patriotism. I don't know if you even
Oh,
remember that book, but
sure.
but for now, let's stick to the novels. And do I think, even though I love that one, I think this is my favorite. And to me, everybody calls the universe of two a love story, and it is, and it's been called the best book of the year by many critics and the best love story of the year. But to me, I don't know why, I think of it as a treatise on guilt. The guilt that this man felt was the overpowering emotion that I felt right through it. Tell us a little bit about the plot of this one, if you would, Steve.
Okay, well, that one, I guess I should start with this, Jim. When it comes to reading, I'm an omnivore. I read everything, and if I've like if it's morning and and the paper didn't come, I'm reading the cereal box. So
Yeah.
so I'm probably one of three people in America that still subscribes to literary quarterlies, and there was one of them, the Georgia Review, that had an essay about pacifism and how pacifism is kind of gone now. You don't hear a lot of powerful voices and respected voices talking about peace as a goal, and maybe in certain individual situations, but not as a way for a country to behave. Um, so I was reading this essay, and there at the back was just like a couple of paragraphs about this fighter pilot, this Japanese pilot who actually dropped bombs on the mainland of the United States. And wait, I may have jumped books. I did. I jumped books on you. Sorry. I'm describing the hummingbird. So sorry, forgive me.
Yeah, you have
So
too
so
many
you
great books is your problem.
no, no, it's that I didn't have enough coffee today. Jim, so Universe of Two is about a
The
19-year-old.
atom bomb.
Yes, he graduates from college, and his uncle says, "We'll keep you out of the war. It's 1944. You're going to
Right.
work on this project that I'm part of." And it
Yeah.
happens to be the Manhattan Project, and he's got a task to do, and it takes him time to figure out that what he's doing is building the detonator that ultimately is the detonator used for Nagasaki, the second bomb.
Yeah.
And after the war, yeah, you said guilt. The word that I would use is conscience. That the war was on his conscience, and the bomb and its effect was on his conscience. And so he, after the war, he's offered a full ride to get a PhD in physics from Stanford, and he gets there, and everyone's talking about building bigger bombs and stronger bombs, and he's had enough of that, and so he quits and takes a part-time job repairing church organs because he'd been a choir boy all his life. And by the time he died in 1984, he was considered one of the great cathedral organ builders of all time. And so that's what he did as his act of atonement. And that's a true person that did that. And I heard that story, and he has a biographer, and I met with her, and I talked to his family, and I went to the place where his organs are made. And from that came this love story because I didn't want it to just be him. I wanted his wife to also be part of it, where she's encouraging him to do what you're supposed to build and be a man when she doesn't have a security clearance. She doesn't know what he's making. And so when she sees the devastation, she's like, that's what I pushed you into. And her conscience is involved too. And so they have a lifelong love affair of atonement and doing that with one another. And unfortunately, that book came out right at the height of COVID, and it didn't reach the readership that I was hoping for, that my publisher was expecting. And I love that you brought that one up because it really is. Oh, I don't know. It's not best or whatever, but it's my favorite ending. I think it's a
Yeah.
beautiful ending when she's playing one of his organs at the end,
Yeah.
and I had to learn so much for that. Particle physics and the making of cathedral organs. And I went around the country and heard organs this guy built. Fascinating little detail. One of his organs is in the recital hall at the University of Vermont.
Oh, really?
And it's one of the smallest ones he ever built, but it fills the room in the recital hall. And if you've ever been there, it has all this weird woodwork on the walls and back, and that's all acoustics to make this very powerful organ work in that size space.
Oh, wow, that's terrific. You're right. There's so many different strands to all of your books, but to this one in particular, uh, when I reread this book, or didn't reread it, but picked it up again a few days ago, the whole organ story was secondary to me. I wasn't even thinking of that, and I know that's the essence of the book. I keep thinking, let me try a theory of war on you because that's what popped into my head when I was rereading this.
Okay.
To me, wars historically have been one country gets a army and another country gets an army and the two armies clash. starting with the 20th century, I think it became less of a contest of who has the strongest army, but simply who can kill the most civilians. And it goes to the atom bomb that this fellow was working on. That's my theory of it, at least. I don't know. I don't know if it holds any water or not.
You know, Jim, I've had the privilege now of interviewing people who are veterans, male and female veterans of World War II, Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf War in the 1990s, Iraq and Afghanistan, which if you treat them as separately means I've interviewed people, veterans of six wars, and I have not been in armed services, and I salute the folks who have, and appreciate their sacrifices, even if they're not injured or anything else. They've given up a chunk of their life in service of the country, and they have to take orders in a way that others don't, and that's that is a gift. But there are things that all of those survivors of those wars had some things in common. And I didn't know this until I started to talk with them about it. And one is that they don't want to talk about what they had to do because often what they had to do was kill, right? Or some component of that of making a weapon work and so on. And the other is that they all had periods of great doubt in their faith. And so you put those two things together, and there's a lot of struggle of conscience. We all have things in our conscience that are there, right? We all have a day that we were not at our best, or a moment when we were selfish when we could have been generous, or whatever. We all have that on our consciences. But if you think about living your whole life and people say, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not kill. Okay, here's your gun, kill everybody that's in your way. And 2 years later, okay, we'll take the gun back now, thou shalt not kill.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how do you live with what you had to do? And I even think about my own father who fought in the Pacific Theater in World War II, and he lost a chunk of his ear here, which imagine how much that must have hurt. And 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 he was so private about his wartime duties that when talk to my siblings about it, we all have different stories about what actually happened there. Because he never sat down and said, "Well, here's what happened to my ear." There was the reserve there was, I think, because of conscience. And so that's where this book goes is for me is where anyone can identify is just with somebody saying, my conscience is not right. And what can I do to
Yeah.
atone? You know?
Yeah, that's what I saw in that book, definitely. You
Thank you.
mentioned your dad who's passed on, and also your mom has. Am I misremembering that that was the trigger that led you to writing this nonfiction
It
book, The
definitely
Wing?
led to it. Yes, it
Okay,
definitely
tell
did.
the audience a little bit about that, Steve.
Okay. I guess every interview gets to the tender turf, right?
Yeah.
Um, so my father died when I was 28. He had an aortal aneurysm and he spent a month in intensive care at the Mass General. And we spared no medical extravagance trying to save this guy's life. And it was only after about a month or so that we finally realized he was never coming back. He was already gone. And it was all machinery. And and after a lot of agonizing about what to do, we agreed that we would stop the machinery. And by then, he was well over 300 pounds. He had an ICU beard that my brother Michael was sneaking in to shave. There
Oh,
was family, kind of friction as we were trying to figure out what to do. And we finally said we're gonna switch it all off tomorrow. And then he died that night, so we didn't have to. But it was awful. It was incredibly expensive. And it was very heartbreaking to see him sort of fall away. And then 5 years later, my mom had breast cancer that metastasized, and she died at home in bed, prayer book in her hand.
yeah.
She'd had the family around her a lot. A bunch of her kids were there at the time. She was pain free, and and it cost a fraction as much. And the difference was really one of medical culture. The first case with my dad, it was big medicine. We're going to save this guy. And with my mom, it was hospice. And so I wrote Last Rites to say, like, some people need to be in intensive care, but not everybody. And a lot more people would prefer to be at home and have their pain managed and their affairs in order and their loved ones around and have the smell of bacon cooking and music on and the dog is barking, and life going on for as long as they're alive. And I thought that book would get overtaken by changes in the medical system in like a year. And now it's 20 years old, almost 19 years old, and it's still absolutely so that too many people are being overtreated, over intervened, and I know of somebody who's very, very, very far advanced cancer down in Tennessee, and she's done, and her physician is like, we're just going to do one more round of chemotherapy. It's like he can't accept that she's mortal, and of course we should do all we can for people, but um,
Is it too cynical of me, Steve, to say that money plays a part in these two different philosophies of how to treat the coming on of death?
for a long time, New Jersey had the most intensive care beds per capita in the United States. And guess what? They also had the highest percentage of people who die in intensive care.
Mm.
Okay. They get addicted to the revenue for those beds and from those beds. But I think in general, it is more like what they're aware of. When I was writing that book, um, the medical students at UVM, in their College of Medicine, in their 4 years of medical school, the amount of time that they spent on hospice was an hour.
Wow.
4 years, and unless you chose certain specialties, the amount that you spent on treating pain. Think about when you're ill or hurt or something, pain is number one on your list. The amount of time that they'd spent on pain was half of a chapter in one textbook.
Wow.
And that has changed now. There's been great progress there in lots of places. The big hospital, Johns Hopkins, didn't even have a palliative care program back then. Now they have a very robust one. So we have made a lot of progress. But I don't think it's necessarily that the health system wants the money. I think that people are providing what they think is the best modality of care. And for some people, yes, bring it on. Bring the,
Yeah.
if it's for a trauma situation, a car crash, a heart attack, something like that, go. Use the big, incredible capacity of our health system now. But most people don't die that way now. Most people die slowly, and they have
Yeah.
multiple chronic diseases, and they have cancer, or the Alzheimer's, or Parkinson's, all these things that go over a span of time. And so that's an opportunity that can be filled with meaning and with love and with spiritual calm, and rather than kind of more treatment that isn't really going to change where the finish line is.
Oh yeah, that's terrific. I've been down to the Johns Hopkins Hospital a few times with a family member, and the
Um,
whole place just is just permeated with humanity. You can talk to a janitor or you can talk to the head of nursing down there. And I'm not putting UVM down by any means, but it just seems that humanity comes first. Let's move on to something else, Steve. Am I giving away too much by saying that you're now working on a novel about the artist Jackson Pollock, or shouldn't I even be saying that name?
you didn't say it all. It just like unwind it. No, it's totally fine. It's totally fine. That book is, I would say, put to bed, which is to say that the editing is done and revising is done. We have a cover design, I think, and we have an interior design, and we have a publication date.
What's its title going to be, Steve?
Pollock's Last Lover. And it is about the last 4 months in the life of Jackson Pollock and a painting that surfaced 50 years after he died that may or may not have been done by him.
Oh,
And at that time, his paintings are spectacularly valuable. So that when money is a question, and the authenticity of the painting is a question, and who legally owns it is a question, and the person who's raising all these questions because she's in possession of this painting and wants to sell it is the woman who says that she was his lover
now
for
are
the
you
last 4 months
talking
of his life.
fiction now, Steve?
That is
Or
all
is
real. That is all
this is
real.
okay.
Yes. And what I found out was that there was this painting, and people have gone back and forth about whether it was done by Jackson Pollock or not for now, 60 years and more. And the current belief is that it was made in his studio, but they don't know who was holding the brush.
Oh,
But it's been kind of a great forensic case. And what it really is about, though, Jim, I mean, yes, it's about this great artist and a little bit puncturing the myth of what a macho genius he was.
Uh,
But really, it's about women. Because here's how the story is set up. Half the book is in the time when Pollock was alive, 1956, last 4 months of his life, and this woman who's in love with him, who is not married to him, and how she tries to have standing and influence in the art world of New York City. And then we have 50 years later, a young woman who works at a company that's sort of like Sotheby's, they auction off very valuable works of art. And her job is to authenticate this painting. And her idea of getting ahead is not to use her sexuality or as the woman did in 1956. Hers is to work really, really hard in in the workplace and to work weekends and to work nights and to be really driven. Um, and the comparison of those two women and what their power is and how they obtain power and how they exert their power. And a minute ago I was talking about how we've made a lot of progress in
yeah,
hospice. Sometimes we don't necessarily feel that way if someone in our family is ill, right? And I think the same is true now that that women have made enormous progress in their power now. All
yeah.
you have to do is look 2 days ago, we had two women elected governors of their states by decisive margins, and one of them is the first female governor that state has ever had. And so there's progress, but there's still a lot to be done. And so the the young woman with a 2006 point of view and the lover of Pollock with a 1956 point of view, and she's still alive. There's a lot of friction between them, and
Wow. Give
and
us the, go
there's
ahead.
that's the novel right there.
Give us the title and the publication date again, Steve.
Thank you for asking it. It's Pollock's Last Lover, and it will be out on May 19th.
Oh, great. Good luck to you to do.
Thank
I'm
you.
sure our viewers are sitting there saying, how could this guy know so much? But I happen to know your brain isn't your only useful organ. Your fingertips are good too. We have about 30 seconds left. You don't happen to have your guitar handy, do you?
Well, I always have a guitar handy, just like you do behind you there, but
Oh,
I don't
yeah,
have
but
the
that
30
one's not going
seconds.
to be played. Why don't you pick yours up and play us on out of here?
Oh man, I don't even know if this thing is in tune, but it's part of how the brain works. That if your creativity wanders, you can get in the same side of your brain again
Yeah.
just by having a guitar.
Be prepared to be amazed, folks. Here's Steve Kiernan
How
playing
long am I
guitar.
playing for?
What's that?
Almost in tune, right?
Go ahead. I don't hear anything.
Can't hear it?
No.
I'm playing it really loud. No, I don't think this works. I should do the Jimi Hendrix on it now. I promise I was actually playing it. You couldn't see my hands. I don't know. It needs its own microphone or something. It's part of when I'm writing and I get tired, I can pick this thing up and and play for a few minutes and I'm not tired anymore. I can keep working.
And you've put out a few CDs, I believe, of your guitar playing.
Three, yeah, by golly. I know.
Oh,
I know.
great. Steve, this has just been great. We're out of time, but I sure appreciate you dropping by. Good
Real
luck on the
pleasure.
new book. Thanks a lot. It's been a
Great to see
pleasure.
you, Jim. Thanks for having me along.
Okay, thank you. Take care
Take care.
now.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.